Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and warm welcome to the Asia CCUS Network workshop. I am Dian Lutfiana, Research Associate of Asia CCUS Network, and I will be your MC for today's workshop. At the first launching forum of Asia CCUS Network held in June 2021, it was concluded that CCUS and carbon recycling will be option of crucial technologies to achieve carbon neutrality in Asia region. As such, today's workshop will be focused on cost structure of CCUS based on CCUS model case and the legal framework to support deployment of CCUS in this region. We will have representatives from Mitsubishi Research Institute, MRI, to share their insights on outcome of model case study, cost analysis, and policy proposal, followed by a panel discussion with topics include CAPEX, OPEX reduction potential, policy legal requirement, regional cooperation approach, further project development towards commercialization, and findings from model case exercise. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Mr. Shigeru Kimura, Special Advisor to the President on Energy Affairs ERIA, to giving his welcoming remark. Mr. Kimura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Diane, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen who are participating to this virtual workshop. First of all, on behalf of ERIA, as the Secretariat of the ACN, Asia CCUS Network, I'd like to express my thanks to all the audience here for your participation to this workshop. Secondly, very much appreciate MRI's Mitsubishi Research Institute cooperation to ERIA as a co-organizer of this workshop. CCS and the CCUS is highlighted as one of the promising technology to achieve carbon neutral society around the year 2050. CCS and CCUS will be expected to contribute reduction of CO2 emission come from the thermal power generation and the energy intensive industries such as the iron, steel, and the cement. But its cost is essential. In this regard, ERIA, with collaboration of the MRI, Mitsubishi Research Institute, conducted a research study to forecast the CCS cost, assuming the CCS model case, which consists of the capture of CO2 from the coal power plant, transport of the captured CO2 from coal power plant to CO2 storage site by pipeline, and store of the CO2 into the underground at the storage site. In addition, we also studied appropriate legal framework to support the deployment of CCS and CCUS in ASEAN and the East Asia region. Today, we are pleased to introduce the research studies result during this workshop. After MRI's presentation on the forecasted CCS cost structures and the legal framework, MRI will continuously moderate the panel discussion with 5 panelists from the CCS business entities, storing the CO2 into underground and the regional and the private financial institutions. ERIA also welcome the question and comment from the private audience using the Q&A box mentioned by the Ms. Diane, and presenters and panelists are willing to answer to the question as much as possible within the time. ACN, I will continue to conduct the research study related with the deployment of CCS and CCUS in the Asia region, such as the potential storage mapping and the financial scheme to support commercialization of the CCS and the CCUS activities. Then after the studies, ACN will share the major study result with all of you through the virtual and the real workshop continuously like today. Thank you again for your participation in this workshop, and I hope this workshop will be successful and fruitful for the all the audience. That's my opening remarks, and I back forward to the Diane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimura, for your welcoming speech. Move on to the main agenda. We will hear presentation on outcome of model case study, cost analysis, and policy proposal of CCUS, delivered by Mr. Ulysses Coulmas and Ms. Ayami Saimura. Both are researchers from Mitsubishi Research Institute. For the audience who have questions for the speakers, you can write down in the Q&A box available on your screen. So without further ado, Mr. Coulmas and Ms. Saimura, please, the time is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Diane, for your kind introduction. A very good day to everyone. I hope you can see my slides. Well, I'm Ulysses Coulmas of the Mitsubishi Research Institute. I'd like to express my gratitude to everyone who is attending today's workshop and thank ERIA for making this event possible and giving me and my colleague Ayami the opportunity to present our work. Our presentation today consists of 3 parts. First, I will present the results of our cost estimation study for a CCS model case project. After that, Ayami will give us an insight into the regulatory and policy part of the study, followed by an introduction to possible actions for regional cooperation. In the past few months, on behalf of ERIA, the Mitsubishi Research Institute conducted a model case study for a hypothetical CCS project in the ASEAN region. Aim of the study is to offer a rough cost breakdown of a full-scale CCS project. We hope this helps to visualize the cost scale and major cost components for a CCS project to a wider audience. Public source information from previous studies and projects have been used to analyze the costs. Some of the numbers have to be treated cautiously, as some components are missing in the assumptions. Additionally, legal and regulatory frameworks, as well as possibilities for regional cooperation, have been investigated. So, first, we started with the selection of country for the model project. Indonesia was chosen as a major oil and gas producer in this region. We looked at the distribution of the gas and coal-fired power plants. As shown on the map, it became very clear that the vast majority of the power plants are located on Java. Additionally, data from the Global CCS Institute gave a big picture of potential basins in this area. It showed that pretty much the whole subsurface around Java has potential basins. So, therefore, we came to the conclusion that Java is a fitting location for the model project due to its high density of CO2 sources and relatively good accessible storage potential. We tried to further narrow down the targeted area. We selected the Blora Region C of the Central Java province for the study. The location is marked with a red box on the map. It is a relatively well-examined area by international studies for the purpose of CO2 storage. It does also have good accessibility to multiple coal-fired power plants. After setting our regional conditions, we examined the specification and characteristics of the model case. Well, as many ASEAN members still rely on coal-fired power plants as a relatively cheap energy supplier, we recognized a realistic demand to retrofit existing power plants with carbon capture technology. Pardon me. We decided to take a medium-scale ultra-supercritical coal-fired power plant as an example for the model case study, as they are likely to be the last ones to be shut down. It will be a 500 megawatt plant with an expected lifespan of 25 years after the retrofit. We applied chemical absorption using amine with a capture rate of 90%. The capacity factor will be 80% and heat rate is set at 40%. The captured CO2 will be transported to an injection well at the deployed gas field through a 50-kilometer onshore pipeline. The lithology at the selected area is a sandstone formation of about 2,000 meters. Further specifications are shown in this table. To analyze the costs, we divided the CCS value chain into the three obvious components: capture, transportation, and storage. For the capture cost analysis, we referred to the right study for a basic cost breakdown of a capturing site at a retrofitted coal-fired power plant with a capture capacity of 1 megaton CO2 per year. We scaled it up to a capture capacity of 2.87 megatons CO2 per year. All costs are calculated with an annual expense ratio of 9% and repair costs of 3%. The supporting boiler is by far the most cost-intensive component within the CAPEX breakdown. Equipment for higher desulfurization have also been taken into consideration. Fuel and additional labor are having the biggest impact on the operating costs. Obviously, absorbent is also an important factor in this part. In this case, data for CAPEX labor was not available and is therefore not included to avoid any bigger complications. So we assume that the actual unit cost would be something north of $40, but at the moment for this case, we've calculated a number $37.27 per ton. Next to the transportation costs. Regarding the transportation costs, we are looking at pipeline costs, as this will be our transportation methods for this project. CO2 pipelines are a relatively mature technology with multiple thousand miles already in operation. Pipeline costs are highly variable depending on type of terrain and infrastructure crossings, as can be seen in the table below. The cost range is from $50,000 per mile up to $700,000 per mile if you go offshore. In 2018, the National Energy Technology Laboratory designed a mathematical model to calculate the cost breakdown for a CO2 pipeline. It offers the possibility to get multiple cost estimations by giving the necessary variables such as pipeline length, diameter, or capture capacity. We used the model to calculate the costs for a 50-kilometer long, 12-inch pipeline. The targeted region is hilly and in parts densely vegetated, which drives the costs higher. We chose to apply a par cost calculation model out of the three given options, which was the most expensive result out of this, and taking the geological cost driving factors into account. Next to the apparent costs like labor, materials, and pumps, it is important to take costs of a right-of-way and damages into account. Operating costs are relatively project-specific, and the exact operating expenditure for operations and maintenance of the assets is not uniquely defined by existing documents, since the full OPEX also includes elements related to overhead and allocation of costs from other functions and their equipment. Annual operating costs such as fuel for the compressor stations, repair and pigging costs, IT and telecommunications should be considered. Usually a share of the capital costs of 3.5% is applied for a common onshore gas pipeline. We again used NETL's model to calculate the OPEX for our model case. In total, this gives us a unit cost below $1 per ton CO2. In the storage cost model, multiple stages must be taken into consideration. A lot of subsurface research has to be done in the site screening phase and the site selection phase, which will usually take several years to complete. The duration for permitting depends strongly on the country in which the project takes place. but the technologies and equipment used for the geological storage are widely used in the oil and gas industries. However, there's a significant range and variability of costs due to the site-specific factors, especially if the injection site is onshore or offshore, and depending on the reservoir depth. We again referred to Wright's study that offered multiple cost scenarios for different site specifications. Besides the sink depth, size of the well itself and distance from the coast are very important factors that have an immense impact on the total storage costs. In our case, it will be an onshore storing site with a depth of 2,000 meters. For the estimated yearly capture emissions of 2.87 megatons CO2, we decided to drill 6 500 kiloton per year wells. As you can see in the table, operation costs of the compressor station are not included. Combined with the high variability of costs depending on the actual subsurface situation, we assume that the unit costs can rise to the double of the calculated number, which is in this case a little bit above $12 per ton. Various sources are from different years. We have applied a planned cost index to adjust the costs to the year 2020. After adjustment, the final unit cost for this model project is $62.8 per ton CO2. Breakdown-wise, the capture costs are the most expensive, with over 70% overall. Transportation costs are minimal, which is no surprise considering the short distance and the fact that all parts are onshore. As mentioned earlier, storage costs can rise significantly, so the cost balance between capture and storage might differ. As an additional reference, there are some calculations in public studies for the shipping of CO2. Considerations are mainly for coaster ships, which means they are targeting mid-range transportation for a limited area close to the coast, as planned in multiple countries in Europe, like Norway or the Netherlands. The widest available range in BEIS's study was for 1,500 kilometers. The CAPEX per ship would be about $300 million US, with annual costs of almost $70 million US. The range of 1,500 kilometers would cover the area marked with the red circle on this map. To create a wide-ranging network that covers all ASEAN members, it is inevitable to have a fleet of CO2 transport ships. But further improvements will be essential to lower the costs for shipping to a feasible level. So now this is it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. And well, if you have any questions, I'm very open to answer them as far as I can. Or shall we directly continue with my colleague?
Thank you, Mr. Coulmas, for your presentation. So we received 2 questions based on your presentation. First is from Haron Lu. What kind of amine was selected? Is this an advanced proprietary amine or generic MEA? And this, do you want to address one by one, or I can read all the question first?
Well, regarding the amine, we haven't selected very well. To be honest, we haven't done a very deep selection of the amine for the absorbents. So I would take the generic MEA, but there was no deeper consideration in the detailed components of the amine. I will also take the next question from Diego, I think. Any risks of miscalculation? regarding the date of right study, which is 2005. This is this is a question which I've expected to, and which we also first really had to think, is this study still up to date? Shall we not take a little bit newer one, which might avoid the risk of miscalculation? So we looked if more recent projects are taking this this study from rights into consideration when they are trying to make assumptions for their own projects, as like the relatively newer ones in Japan, in Tomakomai. They are still taking rights numbers into consideration to make pre-due diligences and pre-studies. So as rights numbers were the most detailed ones regarding breakdown, and many active projects are still referring to it, we took the risk and to apply rights numbers and to apply the project cost indicators and fix the numbers, how to say, to adjust the numbers to as good as possible to the year 2020.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Coulmas. I think that's all for the question for now. So we shall move on to the next presentation.
Okay.
From your colleague.
Thank you very much. I will hand over.
Just one clarification to Coulmas-san. Can you explain the unit in transportation cost? Is it cost per CAPEX, cost US dollar per mile by different terrains? Because I think that if you can explain the cost structure, what is the unit of cost in transportation cost? Is it by mile?
Kilometer.
Do you mean this cost?
Yes.
The unit cost for this for the transportation is for the whole 50 kilometers pipeline, for the whole pipeline part, including operations. So how much would it cost to transport the captured CO2 over the 25 years period, regarding the construction of the pipelines, regarding maintenance of the pipelines, regarding operation of pipelines? So it's not a breakdown per mile or per kilometers. It's all 50 kilometers.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Coulmas-san.
Okay,
Thank you. So yes, please. So I will invite Ms. Saimura to give her presentation.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayami Saimura, and I would like to introduce the result of regulatory and policy study. So as many of you were aware, having a regulatory framework in place that covers the entire life cycle from the planning to post-closure, that clarifies responsibilities is an important step for removing risks and barriers that inhibit investment into CCS and to lead to advancing CCS deployment. In consideration of regulatory framework, a common approach is to consider legal system which aligns with CCUS project lifecycle and which addresses CCS specific issues such as long-term liability and so on. As for the approach to preparing a legal and regulatory framework for CCUS in the ASEAN region, there are three options. The first approach is 1A, to formulate legal and regulatory frameworks by individual country and utilizing existing laws and regulations governing oil and gas. The second approach is 1B, to formulate legal and regulatory frameworks by individual country as well, and to formulate standalone CCS-specific legal frameworks. The last option is number 2, to formulate ASEAN-wide cooperation frameworks on legal and regulatory issues for CCS through setting basic principles on regional basis and then transfer them to country-specific regulation. This slide shows the generic decision gate model for CO2 storage projects. To consider the legal and regulatory framework, it is recommended to cover the whole project life cycle of CCS project. As mentioned before, there are many barriers to CCS project depending on project phase, and such CCS-specific issues need to be addressed through regulatory framework. Issues include access to pore site or storage site, pipeline access, field of geological storage, and long-term liability. Addressing them through the regulatory framework will clarify responsibility and mitigate risk, and it will contribute to financial attractiveness. There are other issues such as financial security and public acceptance that may be addressed either through regulation or through policy incentives. Approaches to developing CCS-specific legal and regulatory frameworks vary from country to country or region to region. For example, the United States has chosen the approach to enhance existing legal frameworks with CCS-specific provisions. EU has opted to develop a standalone CCS-specific legal frameworks. Australia is mixed. Some regional governments have chosen for standalone CCS legal frameworks, while other regional government has introduced CCS regulation for specific projects, such as the Barrow Island Act in Australia. The next two slides gives more details of information for different types of legal approaches. In many EU and European Economic Area countries, EU CCS directive, a standalone CCS regulation was incorporated into existing regulation in each member country. For example, in Norway, some existing regulations were used as they are or amended, while some regulations were newly created in order to implement EU CCS directive. A similar pattern can also be considered in the ASEAN region, where basic principles can be set as a region, while each country develops its own regulations either through amending existing ones or creating new ones. Now, please allow us to look at the status of regulatory framework for CCUS in ASEAN. Please note that our assessment is based on previous study by ADB that looked into Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, and the information is updating, especially with regard to Indonesia, where I have heard there are some updates on development. As you can see on this slide and the following slide, legal and regulatory framework for CCS specific aspects are not fully developed in these 4 countries, except for some provisions for CCS EOR. Again, it is stressed that a clear legal framework is essential in providing clarity to risk and responsibility of parties involved in CCUS as business cases and attract commercial financing. And we believe that one of the ideas that would be greatly facilitate such development is to prepare the ASEAN-wide cooperation framework and basic principles for CCS legal and regulatory issues under the Asia CCUS Network. As mentioned before, there are 3 options for regulatory framework development. Option 1A, utilizing existing laws and regulations governing oil and gas, may be the first step for developing a CCS-specific legal and regulatory framework. On the other hand, we believe option 2, formulate ASEAN-wide cooperation frameworks on legal and regulatory issues for CCUS to guide each country's action, may be a desirable approach for the ASEAN region in the long run. That is because for scalability and uniformity, and CCUS may involve cross-border business cases. So in order to realize the ASEAN-wide cooperation framework on legal and regulatory issues for ASEAN, one of the future actions is to conduct an in-depth study. So this is our idea, but the study may include 4 items. 1, consideration of steps and milestones for realization of guidelines. 2, consideration of structure of the guidelines. So there are various structures, such as whether it should be detailed or simple. And 3, consideration of CCUS barrier issues. And lastly, consultation with stakeholders. So from now on, I would like to explain about policy incentives for CCUS. This slide and the next slide shows policy incentives adopted in various countries. In addition to the legal framework, CCUS faces some specific challenges, especially in the initial scaling up phase, which policies can greatly impact. Policy measures for CCUS include direct capital grants, tax credit, carbon pricing mechanisms, operational subsidies, etc. Continuous support for innovation is also needed to drive down costs and develop and commercialize new technologies. I believe some of them are already under consideration in some countries, and believe a regional approach have an impact on scaling up of such policies, which will in turn have an effect on scaling up CCS projects. So from now on, I would like to move on to topic number 4, further actions for regional cooperation. Based on our research, we would like to propose a regional cooperation concept which encompasses project level, bilateral level, regional level, global level cooperation. Many cooperative activities are already happening, especially on project level and bilateral level. These can be advanced to regional level. And regional cooperation can be reinforced by collective action together with regional partners, such as those participating in Asia CCUS Network. The so-called Asia CCUS Collective Action Initiative can address issues such as clarification of compliance with other international agreements and standards, treatment of CO2 and its disposal in ocean, environmental integrity principle, clarify ownership, access rights, licensing scheme for storage and closure liability, regulate transboundary transportation and storage, creation of ASEAN Fund for CCUS, and lastly, cooperation of ASEAN-wide carbon market. So addressing these issues together can create basic principles for each country to incorporate. With multiple country involvement, we can expect further deployment and scaling up of CCUS projects. Again, providing clarity to risk and liability is essential in securing finance. By doing so, the region would lead to increasing potential and scaling of CCUS deployment. As the first step for such collective action initiative, we propose common guideline principle development while developing pilot demonstration projects, including legal regulatory framework and the Asia CCUS Network. So this is all, that's all from me, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. For your presentation. So we have one question from the audience. Deployment of CCS at scale still face challenges of feasibility, effectiveness because of the technology is expensive. What is the best scheme between private and government to make it more feasible in the future?
Well, thank you very much for your question. So there are many challenges for CCS to be developed and scaling up. But on the other hand, this is the platform, Asia CCUS Network is the platform to facilitate collaboration between private and government, so we can make use of it. And we propose Asia CCUS collective action, and we can start considering development of pilot project, including the legal and regulatory framework to overcome those challenges.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer. So this is the end of the presentation session from Mr. Coulmas and Ms. Saimura from MRI. In proceeding to the next session, we are entering panel discussion session, which will be moderated by Ms. Kikuko Shinchi from Mitsubishi Research Institute. And there will be 5 panelists, Mr. Yoshihiro Sawada from Japan CCS Co, Dr. Muhammad Rahmat Sule from Institute of Technology Bandung, Indonesia, Ms. Jenmyo Shu, Energy Specialist from ADB, Ms. Yukimi Shimura from MUFG Bank Japan, and Mr. Ulysses Coulmas from MRI. Again, please note, if you have any question, please drop on Q&A box during the session. And in this session, our moderator will lead the Q&A questions. So without further ado, I will pass this session to our moderator, Ms. Shinchi. Please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tian, for introducing me and introducing the panelists. I would like to extend my appreciation for ERIA for providing the platform for this workshop, and also for all the audience members who took the time out of your busy schedule to participate, and the panelists who are willing to share their knowledge with us. First, I would like again to briefly introduce the panelists and ask them to explain a little bit further on their roles in the CCUS business. And also I will direct some specific questions. And the panelists are very much welcome to make any comments that you may have on the presentation just given by my colleagues from MRI. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Sawada from JCCS, Japan CCS. My first question for Mr. Sawada is what aspects of CAPEX and OPEX have the biggest reduction potential? And in your assessment, do you see any similarities and or differences from MRI's study? Mr. Sawada, perhaps you can briefly introduce yourself and your experience in CCS and then give response to my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And for the area secretariat, if you can please share the PowerPoint. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Yoshihiro Sawada with Japan CCS, JCCS. JCCS was established as a special purpose company in 2008 in order to conduct CCS project on behalf of Japanese government. JCCS was commissioned by the government to conduct Tomakomai project, and I have been involved with the construction, operation, and international information sharing of this project for 10 years. The Tomakomai project is a first large-scale CCS demonstration project in Japan. The main objectives and tasks of the project are to demonstrate that the CCS system is safe and reliable, and to remove concerns about earthquakes by the data collected. The CO2 emission source is a hydrogen production unit of an oil refinery. The CO2 capture facility has a capacity of 200,000 tons per year. After CO2 capture and compression, the CO2 is injected into two offshore subseabed formations. CO2 was injected for 3 years and 8 months. In November 2019, we achieved the target of 300,000 tons. The key result of the project are we have successfully operated the full chain CCS system, demonstrating its safety and reliability. The onshore to offshore injection scheme saved drilling costs and avoided disturbing the local livelihood. We have dispelled concerns about earthquakes. Our public outreach program has been largely successful with no major opposition to the project. Looking ahead, studies of carbon recycling and CO2 ship transportation are in progress. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'd like to use 2 slides to answer your questions. I will briefly talk about the result of the cost analysis we conducted based on the Tomakomai CCS project. As the Tomakomai project was a demonstration project, we first removed the testing purpose, demonstration purpose facilities from the Tomakomai project and obtained the unit cost of the commercial model with a capacity of 200,000 tons per year, assuming that the facility will operate for 25 years. We then scaled up the facility to 1 million tons per year and obtained the unit cost of the 1 million tons per year commercial model. Next slide, please. The left half of this slide shows the avoided cost of the commercial model, which was $123 per ton CO2 for the 200,000 tons per year capacity model, and $67 per ton CO2 for the 1 million tons per year capacity model. In this study, the unit cost of CCS was reduced almost by half by increasing the capacity by 5 times from 200,000 tons per year to 1 million tons per year, which shows that the scaling up is important for cost reduction. Just for reference, in a study of the unit cost of the free chain project in Norway, Longship project, it is estimated that the unit cost is more than $100 per ton stored when storing 1.5 million tons per year, but less than $30 per ton stored when storing 300 million tons per year. So scaling up is very important. The right half of this slide shows the cost breakdown for the commercial model with 1 million tons per year capacity. CO2 capture cost accounts for 76% of the total cost, indicating that reducing capture cost is important for reducing the CCS cost. The MRI study results also show that the capture cost is above 70%, which is in the same range as our study result. Technical innovation is necessary to reduce the capture cost. Also, in this study, the operating cost is very large compared to the capital cost because the price of the fuel and electricity is based on a commercial basis. If we could use internally produced energy, the operating cost would be much lower. I talked about the importance of scaling up and CO2 capture cost reduction for cost reduction of CCS, but I would also like to emphasize another point: the importance of cost reduction through experience or learning by doing. Without experience, facilities are likely to be over-engineered, and also planning and designing may be inappropriate. Therefore, it is important to continue conducting demonstration projects and knowledge sharing for cost reduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawada, for your valuable input. Now I would like to move on to introducing Dr. Sule from Institute of Technology of Bandung from Indonesia. Dr. Sule, if you can briefly introduce yourself and then also answer my question, which I'm going to ask just now. For Dr. Sule, I would like to ask about the latest situation in Indonesia regarding development of legal and regulatory policy framework, as I believe Indonesia is one of the countries in Southeast Asia that's very active in promoting CCUS. And so if you can give us a feedback on our presentation on the regulatory and policy portion, and also address my questions, I would greatly appreciate it. Dr. Sule, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Shinchi-san. So maybe in the slide you could see the introductory slide about myself. So currently I'm the manager of the National Center of Excellence for CCS and CCUS, as well also the manager of the Center for Carbon Dioxide and Flare Gas Utilization in Institute Teknologi Bandung, Indonesia. And could I share a slide in order to introduce more about my activity? Yeah. If possible, I would like to share. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, before I answer your question, Shinchi-san, so I would like to introduce again our past activity related to the CCS and CCUS development in Indonesia. It was started with the Gundih project in Central Java. Basically, the CO2 come from the Gundih Central Processing Plant, yeah, and the amount of the CO2 is about 800 tons per day. And the idea of this project is to inject back the CO2 released to the air. The CO2 will be sent back to the subsurface. And within 10 years, actually the amount of CO2 that could be injected will be around 3 million tons. Yeah, and we did also several studies concerning geology, geophysics, reservoir simulation, surface facility, and so on. And based on reservoir simulation, actually we could see that there will be incremental gas production from the active reservoir of Kedung Tuban structure. So maybe it is quite interesting because once you inject the CO2 in some places in Indonesia, so there will be economic benefit from incremental oil and gas production. So that's why the total CAPEX and OPEX will be smaller than the income from the incremental oil and gas production. And for the government of Indonesia and also for the operator, most probably the economic benefit will be higher because there will be participation from foreign institutions like JCM from Japan, and maybe we could also, or we could monetize the injected CO2. And then currently we are working together with Japanese consortium led by Janus. The member is J-Power and also JGC right now in order to conduct the further study equal to pre-FEED until February 2022. And then this is the roadmap of the Gundih project. We expect that the first injection could be started at the end of 2025 or early of 2026. And then currently we are managing also several CCS and CCUS study related to the CO2 from ammonia plant or from petrochemical industries in East Kalimantan. We are working together right now with PT Kaltim Parna Industry and also fertilizer company Pupuk Kaltim, and also in Central Sulawesi together with Jokmek Mitsubishi Corporation and PT Panca Amara Utama in order to inject CO2 from the ammonia plant. The amount of CO2 here is about 1 million ton per year, whereas in East Kalimantan more than 2 million ton per year. And we develop also CO2 sourcing hub, source within Indonesia in order to know the storage capacity in some area in Indonesia, and maybe it relates also with the further development strategy of CCS and CCUS. And lastly, I would like to inform you that actually we have developed regulation framework together with Asian Development Bank in 2019. But then this draft should be more developed, and currently we are working as the based on the appointment letter from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. We are working starting from August 2021, and the first draft should be finalized by the end of January. So we expect to have this one by the end of January. And the difference between the previous draft is because we include also some new things. For example, related how to conduct the MRV, how to register the net CO2 that are stored, and then how to monetize the CO2, and so on. So maybe after we submit this draft to the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, there will be follow-up within the ministry, because synchronization of the regulation should be conducted by them. Okay, that's all actually what I could share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sule. I'm very excited to hear the development of the legal framework in Indonesia. And from your explanation, it seems that Indonesia's regulatory framework will mention even the monetization of the CO2, which of course will benefit the economic feasibility of CCUS projects. So I'm very excited to hear the news. Now I would like to move on to Mr. Jim Shu from Asian Development Bank. Mr. Jim is very well known in our circle as the man who can speak about CCS in ADB at any time and always. I'm very delighted to welcome you again. And as you have heard from the MRI presentation, our presentation is proposing regional action to set basic principles and address various issues as a region, including the transboundary issues. Based on your experience and your ADB's experience, what are some of the strengths and perhaps the weakness of regional action? What are the factors towards making a regional action work? So if you can do a brief introduction first and then address my questions, please.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kiko. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me in this roundtable. I'm Jim Shu, Energy Specialist from ADB. Today, I will take a few minutes to introduce the latest CCUS policy under the new energy policy of ADB before addressing your specific question. Okay, so yeah. You know, CCUS is a critical technology for low carbon transition, particularly in hard to abate sectors. So ADB will support CCUS deployment in existing coal and gas power plants to reduce the CO2 emission. We will support the CCUS technologies for power plants, LNG import facilities, and industries. The aim is to enable energy transition initiatives, including the development
we might be having a problem with Mr. Jim Shu's connection to the network. Mr. Shu, can you hear me? I can see your slides moving a little bit, but cannot hear you, Mr. Shu. Okay, so Mr. Shu, you can hear me. Other members of the Secretariat, can you hear Mr. Shu? Okay, perhaps.
Shinchi-san, maybe Mr. Shu has some internet connection problem.
So we will
maybe move on to the next panelist.
Okay. And then we'll come back to Mr. Shu later on. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now I would like to introduce Ms. Yukimi Shimura from the MUFG Bank. Very happy to welcome you again in the Asia CCUS Network event. And as I would like to ask, what are the main barriers as you see in CCUS commercialization? As mentioned by previous panelists and also in MRI's presentation, there are still various barriers in increasing the number of projects as well as scaling up of individual projects. However, we have, I have heard from the member of the audience today from the chat box that the economic feasibility does exist already in some CCUS projects already. So in your view and in your dealings with potential CCUS projects, how do you see the situation?
Thank you, Shinji-san, for your kind introductions. And also I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to organizers for inviting me over to this very important workshop. It's quite interesting to see the comments from the participants that the CCUS can actually now profitable. But before going over to answering to your question, Shinji-san, maybe I can briefly introduce what MUFG does. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. MUFG is a leading global financial services group and one of the largest banking institutions in Japan. And in May 2021, we announced to become carbon neutral in our finance portfolio by 2050. And to achieve this new challenge while meeting global standards, we have been actively participating in various different initiatives as shown in the slides. And they are, for instance, related to realization of net zero commitment, GHG accounting specifically for financial institutions, and scaling up the development of reliable voluntary carbon credit markets. And as MUFG has a significant presence in Asia, we are also being part of developing enabling environment for financial institutions to finance transition activities, including the Asia Transition Finance Study Group, taking well into account the regional perspective. Next slide, please. Now, Sustainable Business Division, where I belong to, it has multiple functions related to sustainable business development for clients, as well as for our group. But division also functions as a global hub of research and solution development and provision for ESG and new business frontiers, such as hydrogen, ammonia, and CCUS. And this is where I actually mainly work for. Next slide, please. Now, MUFG is also committed to assist our clients to support their transition and innovation. And to do so, we initiate our discussion as early as R&D stage to understand new technologies of our clients, and also at feasibility study phase to examine different options for business structure for commercialization. And this is particularly important step for us, as decarbonization requires banks to plunge into unconventional business areas, such as CCUS, and we need to make the unknown known in order for banks to decide to what extent we can actually assume risks in lending for those projects. Next slide, please. Now, this is just for your information about the Asia Transition Finance Study Group MUFG is part of. The group is trying to provide practical guidelines for financial institutions to finance transition activities, specifically for Asia, and provide recommendations to policymakers in the region from the financial sector's point of view. Now, coming back to your question, Shinji-san, of what are the main barriers for CCUS commercialization here in Asia? The foremost significant barrier is the difficulties in developing a bankable business scheme. And this is the reason why I find it quite interesting that one of the participants actually say it is actually profitable now. But as Coulmas San's presentation gives one example of cost structure related to CCUS. The question is, who will pay those costs and how to make the cash flow good enough for business to work and the project developers to invest in the project and lenders like us to provide loans to them. And even in developed countries, government provide long-term incentives, including subsidies for CCUS project deployment. And the project developers and also financial institutions like us need to see government commitments first and long-term financial support. Long-term is very important to make any decisions to invest in CCUS projects. The second significant barrier is simply too many unknown or unclear points from lenders' perspectives. As I mentioned earlier, lenders need to make the unknown known. Banks and insurance companies have started to understand risks involved with CCUS projects, but to many, their understanding may be still at the very high level, and there is a huge gap between what they know and what they need to know. For instance, we do know that some of the legal and regulatory issues presented by Saimura-san can be covered by existing legal and regulatory framework, even in Asia. However, if we start looking into actual wordings of those laws and regulations, I'm actually looking forward to reading the Indonesian regulations, which will coming forward soon. It's very difficult to really understand, and it's really not crystal clear who are actually responsible for those certain issues, and it's very difficult for us to tick off our checklist for regulatory risks. It's also difficult to understand who takes what responsibilities in case of unexpected events to happen, as CCUS is still quite new in Asia and no precedence for us to make judgment based on the past experiences. Over to you, Shinchi-san.
Thank you very much for Ms. Shimura for sharing with us your honest views from hands-on experience on potential projects and explaining the difference between what you already know, but what it's not enough for what you need to know. It's very, I think it really helps us understand some of the difficulties faced by the financial sector. Now I would like to go through the second round of questions. Sorry, but I would like to come back to Mr. Jin-Myao Shu, who was in the middle of his presentation. So if Mr. Shu, perhaps you can pick up from where you left.
Okay, can you hear me now, Ms. Kiko?
Clearly.
Okay, to save the flow, I will turn off my camera, sorry. So I will take this opportunity to highlight the key points of our CCUS policy in our bank. First, ADB will continue support the CCUS deployment in Asia, particularly in existing coal and gas power plants to reduce the CO2 emission. And we will support the CCUS technologies for our power plants, LNG import facilities, and industries. ADB recognizes the crucial role of this technology in the long term, particularly for industry activities that are difficult to decarbonize. And we helped DMCs to plan, finance, and deploy CCS systems. But ADB will not finance CCUS in the context of the EOR, Enhanced Oil Recovery. You know, the government of the UK is the only donor to CCS funds of ADB. UK issued a guidance regarding phasing out fossil fuel in March of 2021. Align UK international support for the clean energy transition, net CO2 emission reduction is emphasized in all projects. To comply fossil fuel phase-out policy of the donor UK, ADB will not support the CCUS projects in coal power plants, refinery sector, EUR, EGR, ECBM. From this guidance, we noticed UK hope the CCUS would be energy transition technical tool and avoid extending fossil fuel in life with the CCUS technology. Here is the priority areas and forbidden areas of ADB in the work of this year. We will not support the pure technology R&D. So regarding the emerging technologies such as the DAC, BECCS, we only follow up the development and find opportunity for the pilot projects. Okay, so now I will try to address your question. CCUS is an essential technology for low carbon transition in our region, although its price is still high and relevant policy and regulatory is at a nascent stage. Regional action on CCUS will benefit all countries in the region to improve technology, reduce cost, strengthen deployment confidence, optimize industry value chain, and so on. ADB is delighted to see the establishment of the regional action institutes and would like to engage this initiative. MRI provided a cooperation proposal on 4 levels. It is very clear, and thank you very much for your insight and contribution. CCUS project is a comprehensive, complex, and big engineering project. The regional cooperation would reduce the high risks at early stage and decrease the uncertainty to environmental issues. Here I suggest strengthening the trust and collaboration between governments. I believe this is a key fundamental driving power for regional cooperation and will speed up the collaboration at different levels. For CCUS regional cooperation, intergovernmental collaboration is significant, but there are many challenges and difficulties at the beginning. Here I suggest starting the regional cooperation from the institute level or company level. And the work at this level will pave way for a high level and broad scope cooperation in the future. The successful collaboration between Indonesia and Japan is a good example for other Asian countries. We can summarize the experience and disseminate it among Asian countries. The work of the Asia CCUS Network is a crucial practice for regional cooperation. We have started our work on this road. The barriers and the challenges we are facing should be pointed out for our consideration and solving. As I believe each country has different regulation and awareness on CCUS technology. The policymakers have different attitude to this emerging technology. This reality constrains the regional cooperation on CCUS. ADB will continue our effort to support capacity building and improve public awareness on this technology to build a good environment for engineering demonstration and commercialization. Each country also has different capable to high costs of CCUS. Most of the Asian countries are developed countries. When talking about this technology, the direct response from the governors is whether the resident and the industry companies can accept the high cost or not, and who will cover the expensive beer. Some countries are worrying about the land source, whether can meet the demand to deploy CCUS facility in their country. And the absence of the suitable CO2 storage site is another issue we have to face. So CCUS is a cutting edge technology, and many countries cannot engage the CCUS industry value chain because of the poor ability on CCUS technology. They may lost competitive leads once CCUS is deployed in their country for long-term high-tech block. So I propose several suggestions to address above challenges for your consideration. First, huge fund resources are needed to facilitate CCUS deployment in Asia. Here I call for the developed countries complete their commitment on climate change to provide funds for CCUS deployment in developing countries of Asia. I think this donated fund will reduce the cost, the demonstration cost in developing countries directly. The cost will reduce further with the cost learning curve, and it will strengthen the confidence of investors and accelerate the deployment. The second, intergovernmental cooperation should be prioritized to eliminate political issues. Now, finally, now we recognize the CO2 as a GHG. With the carbon cycle economic development, captured CO2 will be an essential feedstock. The property of the stored CO2 should be clarified in the law or agreement, particularly for the crossing border CO2 storage projects. The preparation of the related regulation leads deep dive collaboration and the coordination between governments. Otherwise, it will constrain the regional cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Kiko. That's all from my end.
Thank you very much, Mr. Xu. I think your comments really encouraged us, and I think it's very good to know that the work undertaken by Asia CCUS Network is pretty much in line with the direction ADB is facing, and that you agree that the international cooperation is one of the most important factors in promoting CCUS in Asia. Some of the ideas you mentioned of the like funding resource and intergovernmental cooperation, I think these are overlap with the issues raised by other panelists as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Xu. Now I would like to ask my colleague, Mr. Ulysses Coulmas, to give us some comments on, based on the comments we just received from our panelists, as well as some members of the audience, on the possibility of what can we do to either supplement or improve the study that we conducted to address some of the issues raised by the panelists and the audience.
Yes, thank you. Well, obviously, the target of the study this time was to give a wide audience a feeling of the cost scale for such a CCS project. So if you would like to do real life due diligence for a real project, that would never stand a chance to go forward. There's still a lot more data needed to to get public funding, to get even the permission to build such a project. So this time we used public sources as information. So given data from several different circumstances. And that was, of course, quite a difficulty when thinking of how many variables there are that impact such a cost study. As Diego asked me earlier, well, there are quite older sources from the early 2000s up to from published in this year. There are location factors, there are geological factors, geographical factors, there are political factors, there are financial factors, and there are, of course, technological factors. So, but I think most people are quite agree that a CCS project is very expensive, to put it easy. So any party that would like to develop such a big project needs some kind of funding, even though you can see it on the more advanced projects in Europe. They are all government getting some funding from governments or from the EU. So the connectivity to those public fundings, as we had several questions, how can we make those the connectivity to the fundings easier? How can we accelerate the cooperation between the private and public sectors? Those are all things that need further consideration. And well, I think in the questions in the comment section, Diego offered several opportunities to go deeper into profitability of CCS and CCUS, and that would be a very, very interesting part to make the study more complete, like for a follow-up study, maybe to give a long-term cash value estimation, what kind of input is needed and what kind of additional costs and additional stakeholders can be expected with. So the study this time is a very, I don't want to say premature, but it's a first stage study to give a rough overview of what kind of cost scale we are talking.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. I think the comments from the panelists and as well as the audience really help us to consider our possible future actions for improving our work, so we can further discuss towards commercialization of CCUS in Asia. Thank you, Ulysses, for your additional comments. Now I would like to come back to Mr. Sawada of JCCS. You have already given us some ideas for reducing the cost, such as scaling up and doing further work on demonstration. And in your idea, what types of policy instruments are effective in achieving these things, such as the scaling up and continuous demonstration? And also, if you can at the same time give us your opinions on the priority activities that the Asia CCUS Network should focus on if we are to pursue this Asia CCUS collective action initiative. We would be very happy to hear your opinions. Mr. Sawada, please.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. First, cost reduction requires, as I said, scaling up of the project. And since the Harvard cluster model will result in scaling up, policies that favor the Harvard cluster model are needed. For example, subsidy system that favors Harvard cluster project could be considered. Secondly, since the cost of capture is large, policies that favor research related to capture are also necessary. Furthermore, since cost reduction through experience is large, we need a policy that will enable the continuation of demonstration project on an ongoing basis. And concerning your questions about Asia CCUS Collective Action Initiative, I'd like to say, since most of the power plants and industrial plants in ASEAN countries are relatively new, and since ASEAN countries will continue to be dependent on fossil fuels, CCUS is an essential technology to continue the use of existing facilities. Also, although all ASEAN countries generate CO2, some countries have high CO2 storage capacity, while others have only low capacity. Therefore, the first step is to create a business model that will enable the Asian countries to jointly store CO2, followed by a joint feasibility study. In addition, though it is estimated that ASEAN countries have a large CO2 storage potential, this is only an estimate, and it is necessary to confirm the actual storage potential through seismic surveys and drilling of survey wells. This work will take many years and incur significant costs. Since Japan has the experience acquired in the Tomakomai project, Japan should play a leading role in these initiatives through the Asia CCUS Network. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sawada, for your very valuable input. We would like to take your comments into account when planning the Asia CCUS Network's future activities. Now, I would like to come back to Dr. Sude from ITB. Do you have any advice for other Asian countries that are just starting to develop the legal or the policy framework for CCUS? And is there any implication for spreading good practice to other Asian countries from your from the perspective from your the Indonesia experience? And also, if you can also give us your opinion on the priority activities that Asia CCUS Network might focus on for promoting the Asia CCUS Collective Action Initiative. We'd be very much to hear your opinion. Dr. Sude, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shinchi-san. Yes, I believe the first thing that should be implemented by each member, each country in Asian region is to increase the capacity building, increase the awareness about how to reduce the carbon emission by using CCS and CCUS, and how this approach could be implemented in each country. Yeah, of course, if I remember 10 years ago when we learned CCS and CCUS for the first time, so we learned this technology from our colleague from Japan, and the learning curve is increased significantly. So I believe this mode could be implemented also in our neighboring country. Once the capacity building is already conducted later each country could design the best regulatory framework valid for their country, because one country and the other country will not the same. Yeah, it depends on the natural resources, depend on the political situation in each country. But we could spread our best practice to our neighbor. And the first priority for the collective action initiative in Asia, I believe that we have to start with the storage capacity determination, because there are so many versions about how much CO2 could be stored in our area. Yeah. And then the methodology is also not the same. Maybe again, capacity building is one of the first steps. And then once we already have the same or similar methodology, and then it could be implemented by researcher in its country and guided by the expert from the other countries. Yeah. So this is actually my suggestion, Shinchi-san. So I hope that this could be implemented, and I believe that the capability of each person in each country is actually already good. We need only how to more sharpen the capability of each person. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Slip, for your valuable input. I think the experience being built up in Indonesia would be very valuable to the neighboring countries as well. And thank you for pointing out the possibilities of regional cooperation for the important task of researching the CO2 storage site. Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Mr. Xu from ADB some additional questions. So I think I would like to ask the same question as the one I asked Dr. Sule. If you have any advice for Asian countries that are just starting to think of the policies or legal framework for CCS. I think you already mentioned some of that in your presentation, but if you can make some additional ones, I would be grateful. And also your opinions on the priority activities under the Asia CCUS Collective Action Initiative that we might you would like us to consider as priority. We'd be very happy to hear your opinions, please.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shinchi. In my view, the CCUS should be included in the green finance framework and the carbon credit system, because it will bring the investment very directly, and it will improve the confidence of the CCUS investors. So I think this work should be prioritized when you develop the legal or policy framework. Indonesia and China are outstanding representative to facilitate CCUS technology in their own countries. So their experience and license are very precious for other countries. We can request the advanced countries to summarize their experience and then share with others to promote the CCUS deployment in the whole Asian region. Regarding your second question, what are the priority activities? So I think the establishment of the regional CCS fund and compilation with the regional carbon market should be in priority activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Xu, for your very valuable comments. I think the fund and the carbon market are something that can really benefit from active participation by multiple stakeholders, multiple countries. So I think they would, they are something that Asia CCUS Network can consider. Thank you. And now, and I think you made us a very nice way to bridge our discussion with finance also. And now I would like to move to asking Ms. Shimura from Mufg Bank again. You have mentioned in previous workshops that having a robust legal framework and clarification on the risk sharing and who's responsible what is the first stepping stone for considering finance. And I think we have also received comments from the audience today about learning from other experiences in other regions, such as the US or Europe. And I have a feeling, and this is just my guess at the moment, but some of the economic feasible CCUS projects are happening sooner in those regions before Asia. So maybe there are some things that we can learn from those regions. And when you are speaking about having a robust legal framework and having clarification on the responsibilities and the risks, what are some of the model examples that Asian can look towards? If you have any knowledge on that and can share with us, I'll be very happy to hear. And also, if you can add your opinion on the priority activities that we might want to engage in as part of the Asia CCUS Collective Action Initiative, would be very appreciated. So Ms. Shimura, please.
Thank you, Shinji-san. And you just, sorry, it's a,
You can mute yourself on your PC.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry for this echoing, sorry. You just asked a quite challenging piece of question. And I will do my best, but in my personal capacity and my own view, no one single legal model, the regulatory model, can be just copy and paste to ASEAN from developed countries. Now, the reason is that there are reasons why those legal frameworks in developed countries, North America, Europe, Australia, for instance, are in those ways. And many are related to the legal and regulatory structures provided at that point of time in those countries. None of them is identical as what we see here in Asia and ASEAN specifically. And but the good thing is that most of the CCUS projects currently under development in the regions are in the oil and gas sector. So the legal jurisdictions is slightly clear. So maybe we can start looking at those first, just start with the oil and gas sectors and then move forward for any other potential areas. Now, another things that I like to bring it up, I mean, there are many things that we can discuss about the legal and regulatory frameworks, but some developed countries treat CO2 as waste, while others treat it as commodities. And those differences actually also affect when considering a legal framework for the region. Now, it's quite interesting to read some of the chats or the comments from the participants. In order to make the project profitable, certainly we do actually need the incentive schemes. And those are the things that maybe we can learn from the developed countries, because they have actually a quite interesting schemes introduced. And it's actually a timely because some of the Asian countries are starting discussing about the carbon pricings, etc. And certainly, as Mr. Siu of ADB mentioned, we should maybe look into the regional carbon market as well. Now, for your question about, what are the priority activities for the Asia CCUS collective action initiatives, it may be we need to run a few different things in parallel. It's quite important, what Mr. Sawada and Dr. Sule mentioned is about the site selections and the capacity understanding. That's quite interesting, important. And from the lender's perspective, we'd also appreciate move forward on the discussion of possible ASEAN-wide cooperation frameworks on legal and regulatory issues for CCS. And from the private sector's perspective, it may be preferable to have a common guidelines for establishing regulatory framework within the region, regardless of its level of detailedness. And the common guidelines will be extremely helpful if we are going to consider possible regional hub and cluster scheme project development. And that will actually go together hands in hands with what Mr. Sawada and Dr. Sule mentioned. And we can all learn from these discussions within the corporation. Second, it will be quite helpful to have, we also appreciate if the policymaker give relevant stakeholders, including banks and the insurance companies, to join the discussion for this common framework. But second point is that it's quite helpful to have a number of demonstration projects in Asia. Already, I guess Mr. Sawada mentioned about the demonstration project in Japan. Dr. Sude covered the demonstration project in Indonesia. But I think we do need a number. It's not just a one single demonstration project, but a number of demonstration projects in Asia. And it is also useful to learn from these projects. Learn from other experiences in developed countries, but we do need demonstration projects within ASEAN region, especially from the financier's point of view. And this will also help us formulate the common regulatory framework. And the third, and not least, the policy support first to realize those demonstration projects, and the incentive schemes to be bankable when those projects are scaled up to commercial levels, including some of those points raised by the participants, using the carbon credits and so forth, but also the transition finance. Now, in ASEAN region, some countries and the region as a whole is currently developing taxonomies for sustainable finance. And those can actually go hands in hand together with the regulatory talks and the incentive schemes you're discussing over CCUS and the green finance, as what Mr. Xu mentioned. Over to you, Shinchi-san.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shimura, for your valuable inputs. I think your comments very was in connection with all the other panelists' comments as well, and it was enlightening to learn that learning by doing is not just for cost reduction, as Mr. Sawada mentioned earlier, but it's also for risk reduction and increasing the commercial viability of CCUS projects. And learning by doing, it can be, if you want to do it at a scale, you need it's better to do it on a regional basis. So I think that's there's another incentive for us to work as a region. Thank you to all the panelists for engaging in deep discussions. And also I would like to thank the members of the audience for giving us valuable comments in the chat box. I think we were able to further our thinking and frame our comments based on the audience participation. So thank you for that. So as a summary, it's very tons of useful information provided by the panelist members, and it's very difficult to summarize briefly, but I would just like to touch upon some of the key findings, which I believe are very useful in our future consideration of promoting CCUS as an Asian region. I think from discussion today, we learned that cost reduction and the regulatory framework are intertwined, and capacity building and knowledge share are keys for contributing to cost reduction and development of regulatory framework, because cost reduction is most likely to be achieved through technological development and scaling up. And both technological development and scaling up need capacity building and knowledge share. And there are also important aspects, as mentioned by some of the panelists, as the things that we should prioritize under the regional framework, such as the CO2 storage potential survey, and also increasing and engaging in the joint study or demonstration. And these activities will lead to solving some of the problems that we're facing now, as mentioned by the panelists, such as the learning by doing, as I just mentioned, through this joint work will lead us to reducing costs and clarifying some of the unknowns that inhibit us from taking the projects forward. And doing these activities as a region, I think it was very enlightening to hear that regional framework increases confidence. And I think confidence is what is exactly needed to push large-scale projects forward, because we need efforts by not just the technology developer, the government, and the site owners, but we also need insurance companies or financial sector, as just mentioned by the panelists. And the region can do a lot of things, and the region can do, I think, little things, but the least we can do is to work together for increasing the confidence. And I think the discussion today would definitely contribute to that as the first stepping stone. And I hope that we can have more discussions like this in our future events. I think it's very helpful. I think helpful in thinking about the future of Asia CCUS Network. Thank you very much again. And I would like to hand over the mic to Ms. Diane, our MC.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shinchi, to lead the panel discussion session. And thank you for all for the fruitful presentation and discussion. Hopefully our discussion today can be useful for all to further deploy the CCUS technologies within the region. So before we end today's workshop, now I call upon Dr. Han Fumin to say a few words for closing remarks. Dr. Fumin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dian. First of all, I would like to congratulate the MRI team that provide a very comprehensive study, I think, on the CCUS model case study. First of all, thank you so much for particularly Shinchi-san and Coulmas and the whole team of MRI to bring out very interesting result of the whole value chain of the CCUS, so that this will serve as the basic for discussion, because without this understanding, I think it's quite difficult to understand properly in the context of deployment CCUS in the context of ASEAN and East Asia. I think this document, this technical document will, I think, greatly benefit to our regions for the future deployment of CCUS. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all the excellent speakers, particularly I think from Mr. Savada-san, Saimura-san, and Jin Mao-san, and Dr. Sule. I think you bring very rich experience to this discussion, and we greatly appreciate your input. And we also greatly benefit from many questions I seen from the chat box as well as a question drop box, that I think those will enrich our study further. I think there are several critical questions posed by our audience that could actually enrich and enhance our study further. And I greatly thank all the audience and participants. And just to, since San already wrap up particularly all these important thing, but I just want to highlight that this quite important, that the first time we understand likely on the cost estimation of the whole value chain from the capturing particularly. And we know that the several study cross-checking by Tomakomai project as well, I think very similar to this outcome, particularly like the cost of capture represent over 70% of the whole CCUS value chain. And then I think transportation costs and the storage costs. And this will be important. It depends on technology, geography, and other suitable. But at least this is a very good picture for ASEAN countries to look further and adapt this, check further if they really want to apply to their particular context. And further, I think what very interesting that this study bring in, I think the study provide very comprehensive policy instrument by at least look at the experience from US, Europe, which very already advanced, and how US doing by building from existing oil and gas policy and other, while Europe go very new thing that want to have CCUS, one of the EU directive to really put that very special. I think all of these Asian can also learn from how they want to build their policy instrument. As I think the excellent speaker have highlighted, that we from both financial institution as well as from the bank, I think it's very important that, as you said, that to have robust legal framework, but there are no, I think, anything that has to be very strict, that have to be a guideline or something that need to develop to fit particular thing, but it need to be kind of flexible, suitable to the each of the project condition. But at least we need to understand that to have a legal framework to support the speed up of the CCUS deployment. I think this is very clear. And also from the banking, it's clear that to understand more risk of this financing of CCUS. So in order to de-risk, I think the unknown thing need to be known. I think this is very important. I think most of the issue that we need to explore from our research and understanding by getting know more these technologies, so that we can actually finance this. And this is also important, as the Chin Mao has highlighted, to put CCUS under a green financing, and ASEAN have developing the taxonomy to some extent. This taxonomy is aligned with the European green financing to some extent, I think, but it need to check further whether CCUS already been very well defined in the ASEAN taxonomy. With this, I think I do not have further to add, but to congratulate the MOI team, and also to thank all the excellent experts and speakers that share your insight for today's conference, and also thank for the audience that provide us very active question and also your participation. And on behalf of the Asia CCUS Network, we greatly benefit from this kind of forum, to bring knowledge up to date and also share experience among stakeholders in ASEAN and East Asia. With this, I again thank you so much, and the floor back to Dian. Thank you, by the way.
Thank you, Dr. Formin, for your warm closing. So we come to the end of today's workshop. Thank you all speakers and participants for your remarkable presentation, discussion, and engagement. Please visit our website on CCUS. Please visit our website on www.asiaccusnetwork.area.org to receive our updates and upcoming event, as well as today's presentation. Again, thank you very much for your participation. We are looking forward to seeing you in the upcoming Asia CCUS Network event. With that, I close this workshop. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.